Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Carl Cabasel, and I am the producer of the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast, and I'll be your moderator today for this special event called Let's Chat Health and Happiness in a COVID World. Today, we will have the host of the podcast, Dr. Onye Nnorom, aka Dr. O. She'll be the host of the show today, and she'll be interviewing our special guest, Ms. Celina Caesar-Chavannes, who's a mental health advocate and former member of Canadian Parliament. Now, our agenda today is pretty simple. We're going to start out with an interview in the first part, and then in the second part, we're going to get you to get interactive with us, sending us questions, comments. We're going to do a whole chat. And to get us ready for that, let me just orient you to what we're using today. So if you're watching me now, you're probably watching through a YouTube live stream or perhaps recorded. Either way, there is a chat or a comment box to the right side of the screen. You'll see it right here, just to the right side of the screen. Feel free to put in your comments, type in your questions for Celina if you're watching this live. And if not, I believe you can still participate in the chat by adding comments and questions and so on. And of course, if you have suggestions for the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast that you'd like to leave for us, by all means, do that as well. Now, a little bit of ground rules, of course. Please keep in mind that this is an exclusive space. It's a safe space, and we expect everybody to conduct themselves accordingly. So please, let's be respectful of our guest, Celina Caesar-Chavannes, Dr. O, our team here, and everybody else who's participating in the chat. The other thing to keep in mind is that myself, Dr. O, we can't provide medical advice. So the purpose of this chat really is to promote mental wellness by taking this very extraordinary moment in our history where we're all kind of, self-isolating and doing the social distancing, but we still want to stay in touch with each other, have conversations, and that's really what this is about. So if you want to know more about some of the details around that and the limits of what we're going to be talking about, you can consult either the Eventbrite invitation or you can go to our website, which is www.RaceHealth&Happiness.com. And that will have a lot of the notes from the shows, from the podcast, that will give you a sense of what the limits of what we do are. Okay, now that we've taken care of some of that housekeeping, during the talk, every now and then, I'm going to pop up a poll question, and we want you to participate in that. So you will see that come up on the screen, and I want you to feel free to participate, to answer the questions as they come up, and you'll see a little bit more of that later when they do come up. So just to sort of test it out, we're going to put up our first question. And if I could get the control room to put that up on the screen for us. And I'll tell you that the first question is just an easy one, just to make sure everything is working properly. And that question will be, are you familiar with the show? Are you familiar with the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast? As a matter of fact, today we've just put out our second official episode and our third episode overall. So this is what the format looks like. If you're using, if you're online on a computer, you can go to the website. We're using a platform called Poll Everywhere. And the website is pollev.com/racehealthhappy. If you're using a mobile device, you can text Race Health Happy to 37607. And you only have to do that one time, by the way. Once you've registered by texting Race Health Happy to 37607, you're in. And then for every question that comes up, you can just tap in or text A, B, or C. In this case, this first poll has only 3 answers. So the question is, who is familiar with the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast? If you've never heard of it, text A, and we're hoping by the end of today to change that and that you will know it and hopefully be curious about it. If you've heard of it but haven't checked it out, text B, and hopefully again, after hearing what we have to say today, you'll want to really check it out. And if you've listened to one or more podcast episodes, text C, and if that's the case, we certainly thank you for your participation. So we're going to let the numbers roll. And it looks like, okay, it looks like we have 40% have never heard of us. Okay, we have some work to do. 40% have listened to one or more episodes. Thank you for that. And 20% have heard of it, but haven't checked it out. So thank you, everybody, for participating in the poll. Okay, so we'll take that down and we'll get back to getting ready for the main event here. We're going to have a lively discussion, it looks like. So I'm glad that part was working. Now it's time for me to introduce our host for today, and that is Dr. Onye Nnorom. Now, she is a public health specialist and family doctor whose work focuses on the health impacts of racism. She is assistant professor at the University of Toronto in the Faculty of Medicine, and she is the host, again, of the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast. Dr. O, take it away.
As Dr. Carl said, my name is Dr. O, and I am a public health and preventive medicine specialist and family doc. I teach at U of T, and I am just incredibly grateful that we're able to do this. I am the host of the new podcast, Race, Health, and Happiness, and I am very grateful to all of you for tuning in. I'm grateful to the team that we're trying to do this for the very first time, each from our homes, but really we want to lift your spirits and bring you joy. That's the goal today. So in that spirit of gratitude, I also want to say that I'm grateful for this land. I am grateful to be here in Toronto, or the Indigenous term Toronto, and to the people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years, like the Haudenosaunee, like the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Wendat. And I'm grateful to be on my own journey of understanding truth and reconciliation, specifically as a woman of African descent, because here in North America, we have our own complex history. But I'm particularly grateful for Celina, who is on the line with us and agreeing to do this today. Thank you, Celina. I'm so inspired by your tenacity and your authenticity. So I thought this is what people need to see. This is Monday, the middle of either the home day or the work day, wherever you are. And just to hear about, her experiences navigating and thriving, I kind of call you like an overcoming ninja, right? It's not that there aren't challenges, but you're really good at overcoming. And I'm going to formally introduce you before I pass the microphone on to you, okay? Because I want the audience to know. I want them to know, okay? Okay. So let me formally introduce you. So Celina Caesar-Chavannes is the former member of Parliament within the Government of Canada, and she was representing the town of Whitby. During her term as a member of Parliament, Celina advocated for people suffering with mental illness and received the Champion of Mental Health Parliamentarian Award in 2017. She has spoken up publicly about issues of racism and her personal mental health experience, including experiencing depression. And before entering politics, Celina was a successful entrepreneur, launching and growing an award-winning research management consulting firm. She's a mother, a businesswoman, and a community advocate who speaks truth to power. Celina, welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. O, and to Dr. K, everybody who's working on this podcast and this now video stream. I don't know a lot about technology, but however you're doing it, thank you for doing it so that we could have this conversation with the world.
Yeah, so how are you doing today?
It's such a loaded question sometimes when people ask me how I'm doing, because you don't want to give the perception that sometimes you're having a bad day and you want people to think that things are going well and blah, blah, blah. But some days are harder than others. So I think throughout even my political journey and now, I've been very honest right up front. Today isn't one of the great Celina days. The sun is shining and it usually is a really great time for me, spring. But I think because we're stuck inside, we can't appreciate that springtime as we used to. And therefore, it's actually making me appreciate it more because we can't enjoy the outside like we used to be able to.
Yes, yes. I appreciate you saying that because, I've now adopted the practice that when people ask me how I'm doing, I might not give like a really long answer of all the stuff that's happened, but I actually say, you know what, today I'm doing okay, or today I'm not doing so great, but let's push past it or whatever. But I
Yeah,
actually answer honestly, because otherwise, what's the point of the question?
right.
Right? Everybody's like, fine. But actually, that now that you talk about coronavirus 19 and us living in this COVID world, that becomes, a challenge in every day, because I was listening to a talk just a few weeks before the coronavirus 19 pandemic really hit North America. And this person was saying, it's hard to appreciate normalcy until it is taken away from you. Like, we're always aiming for more and more, and not always having that gratitude for the, the normal stuff until it's no longer there. Now we are in a new normal though, so there's still opportunities for gratitude. But I wanted to ask how you are able to maintain your well-being in this COVID-19 context, in this COVID world.
So our family is actually on, I think, day 12 of the 14-day mandatory quarantine, because our two daughters returned, one from Australia and one from the UK. So we didn't really know the rules as to whether or not they stayed home except for 14 days, or we all did, but we all had contact with them. So I assumed we all had the 14 days. Anyhow, we all stayed home for 14 days and we're on day 12. And what you said earlier about appreciating sort of the things that you sort of took for granted before, it's something that I think as a family, we really had to focus on. We've always had dinners together. So, that wasn't outside of our norm. We've always sat down at the table and had dinner and sort of talked about our day. But instead of talking about what we did today, because basically we saw what each other did today, we've incorporated, reading a book together or playing a board game together, which we usually don't do. We played tennis on the Wii together and have family competitions. We've found different ways to unplug while being here in this space and reconnect together in a different way. I think our family has always been really, we love hanging out with each other. And I always tell my kids, like, go hang out with someone else but us, which is strange because I don't think I hung out with my parents like that. And I liked hanging out with them, but we do. So it's been an interesting experience. And I think if people could learn to appreciate what COVID is doing, and I know it's going to be hard at different levels for different people, where it's not a competition to appreciate COVID in any way. But I think if we could take an opportunity to appreciate some of the little elements that it has allowed us to do, then we could be grateful for this time.
Yeah. How old are your kids?
I have a 20-year-old who's Desiree. She's going to be turning 21 this year, which in quarantine is a fiasco. I have Candace, who's 15, who's supposed to have her sweet 16 in about a month. Quarantine fiasco. And then my Johnny, who is, oh my God, he's 11, 12. Oh God, how old is Johnny? I could never remember how old he is.
But 11 or 12.
He's 11 or 12. I could never remember. But anyhow, this is so bad. I'm giving myself such a bad impression to the world.
No, we do that all the time. Any parent does that.
Well, he's a grade 6. That's what I know.
Yes. No, I mean, so I'm really glad that you talked about these moments with family. I think for some of us, we're away from family and some people are feeling disconnected. Some people are feeling more connected. In the house, we're 3 generations. So my parents came to stay with us, and I've got my 4-year-old and my 2.5-year-old and my husband here. And, it's a lot. So I think people are dealing with different stressors, but nonetheless finding opportunities for gratitude, I think really have been shown, like you just said, like what you said, finding those nuggets of gratitude every day can help you well. Are there any practices, like anything that works for you that you'd like to share with the audience here? I know that before this went live, there were 168 people registered. I have no idea how many people might have registered at the last minute. So that was from early this morning. So lots of people on the line, but any tips or tricks just from your own life on what you're doing daily to stay well in this coronavirus context?
Yeah, so I'm trying to stay as active as possible. So I was never really a gym person or a go for a run person. I used to do those things, but I don't really do them anymore. So it becomes more things that I do around the house, right? So I get up and I try to meditate. I still take that time to do that meditation practice. And meditation is, I do prayer as well, prayer speaking to the creator, but meditating is listening to the creator. So I take that time to do that. I don't really exercise. So I go out around the yard and, I'm sweeping up or raking up the leaves or just trying to get myself a little bit active. I'm trying to find new books to read, but I'm not. So, and I think that's important because, I think during this time, you're hearing people, starting a new course and, writing a book and, doing all these phenomenal things. Well, this is not a COVID competition. This just really is, how can you, within this context, do what you need to do to feel well and whole? And if that means some days not getting out of bed, child, cool, don't get out of bed, right? The world is going to keep spinning if you stay under those nice comfy sheets, which sometimes I have to do, because if you're navigating this space with major depressive disorder and anxiety, that might be what you have to do. So I do a number of different things.
That's it. I think it's about having, a number of things in your toolkit, and you mentioned a number of them. And part of that is also the self-compassion to be like, you know what, this is a lot. And so sometimes you need to sleep, like even with the kids, again, 4-year-old and a 2-year-old boy, a lot of the running around. And I do reach a point sometimes I'm like, okay, if they're not going to have a nap, I'm going to have a nap. Like somebody needs to help me with these kids who don't want to have a nap, because I need. But I love actually what you described, because I've been looking at the literature and going around and talking to people and really saying it's about like having self-compassion, trying to have somewhat of a routine, and you described a routine. And then I've been quoting actually the show A Different World, relax, relate, release. So finding opportunities for relaxation, you said meditation, finding time to relate, and you talked about with your family, or some people it's online or it's social media, and then release. Like, so it might be for some people reading a book, for you it might be taking a walk outside. But yeah, I'm glad to see that, I'm starting to notice that people are saying that. And also when you look at what CAMH mental health and CDC mental health around COVID are saying, it's a lot of similar advice. It depends on the person, right? Like what you have to find what works for you. And sometimes staying in bed might be the thing that you have to do. And sometimes going outside and having that walk, maintaining physical distance, but having that walk is going to be really important. Now we're going to be talking about a lot of things today. Yes, we're living in this coronavirus context. You'll notice sometimes like my screen there's a delay with my voice in the video. I don't have a plugged-in internet at home. I have Wi-Fi. So we'll hope that the Wi-Fi, I don't know, has compassion for us and this works. But I'm going to be asking you about a lot of different things. You mentioned, experiencing depression and anxiety. We talk about that in the podcast as well. So that actually is being released today. People can listen to that there, but we'll cover a little bit of that today. But also, racism doesn't end just because it's coronavirus. So this is the Race Health and Happiness podcast. So we'll be talking about issues of racism and discrimination too. So actually that brings me to my second question for you. So we're going to move away a little bit from the present coronavirus context and a little bit about what I had said before about speaking truth to power. So you are no stranger when it comes to overcoming and speaking truth to power. And, there's many examples of you doing this. So I don't want to kind of typecast your advocacy, but the one that I particularly have loved seeing is your speaking out about Black body shaming when it comes to Black women, and also expanding that to body shaming and the issue of inclusivity broadly. So, not everyone knows this, but for Black women, when it comes to our hair, like right now, I see you are rocking the cornrows. So there they are. Yes, the braids. But for us, it's not just an issue of body beauty standards, but where we might wear our hair in certain ways, sometimes or oftentimes maybe we're risking people stereotyping us and being limited with regards to opportunities in the classroom, opportunities for employment, opportunities for promotion, or even like what happened to me when I was a medical student. being basically bullied by teachers. And, you know, when you're on rotation in hospitals and you went to quote unquote, get your hair done, right? So I had an episode where I was on an internal medicine rotation as a student, and the physician who was my supervisor noticed that I had gone and gotten braids and said, oh, so you have time to go to the salon. And he just, you know, kept quizzing me. And I was doing well, but he was determined to keep asking me questions until, you know what I mean? I looked like I didn't know the answer, or I didn't know the answer in front of my peers, until I basically looked stupid in front of my peers, which was really a form of bullying. But for a lot of us, we face these things with regards to our hair. So we're gonna play a clip to where you actually bring this out in the open, something that a lot of us hold, you know, and try to manage day to day. So I'm going to ask our team to play the clip.
This week I have my hair in braids, much like I've had for most of my childhood. However, Mr. Speaker, it has come to my attention that there are young girls here in Canada and other parts of the world who are removed from school or shamed because of their hairstyle. Mr. Speaker, body shaming of any woman in any form, from the top of her head to the soles of her feet, is wrong. Irrespective of her hairstyle, the size of her thighs, the size of her hips, the size of her baby bump, the size of her breast, or the size of her lips, what makes us different makes us unique and beautiful. So, Mr. Speaker, I will continue to rock these braids for 3 reasons. Number 1, because I'm sure you'll agree, they look pretty dope. Number 2, in solidarity with women who have been shamed based on their appearance. And number 3, and most importantly, in solidarity with young girls and women who look like me and those who don't. I want them to know that their braids, their dreads, their super curly afro puffs, their weaves, their hijabs, and their headscarves, and all other variety of hairstyles belong in schools, in the workplace, in the boardroom, and yes, even here on Parliament Hill. Thank you.
Right. So that must be a little bit of a throwback, right? That was from 2017, I believe. But yeah, can you talk about what inspired you to do that and to bring voice, right, from the margins into the center?
So something, I mean, something had happened a little bit before that, in August of that year, that really made me realize, number 1, I had a tremendous responsibility while I was there. So you often hear the term representation matters, but representation to me matters only when you have something that matters to you. So if you're just there representing but not doing anything because you're not passionate about anything, then what are you there for? You might as well get out the seat, right? So what mattered to me when I was part of this bigger conversation was I was hearing that people were focusing in on issues around gender, around, you know, there being equality or equity for gender, which typically meant white women. And then I was hearing conversations about how other racialized women were going to get advantages, and, you know, trying to put in policy to help them. And I had a moment of pause where, you know, you could either get mad at that moment, like turn into the angry Black woman, or you could like think, oh my God, how am I going to fix this? And I asked the question, I said, well, why are we focusing in on these issues? Aren't Black women important? And there was a, you know, well, Celina, you know, this and this has happened, and all, you know, we had the shooting of the mosque in Quebec, and I said, fair enough, but when you have young Black girls removed from school because of their hairstyle, like, isn't that important? And I didn't want to equate one to the other, but I knew I needed to raise the consciousness of the people around me. No matter how much I was talking about equity and racism and microaggressions, I realized that it hadn't penetrated through individuals that were in my circle enough to have them speak to it on a platform, on a national platform. So I just thought, I'll do it. And then I thought, well, how could I do it in a way that is most impactful? And I thought the thing that mattered to me, well, representation matters, what mattered to me were young girls that look like me. And I thought, you know what? We're gonna take it way back. We're gonna take it back in the day. I'm gonna make sure that when they watch that video, they see a woman in parliament who really looks like them, who has their hair styled like them. So when somebody says, oh, you need to leave the class because your hair is in braids. Oh, well, Miss Celina didn't have to leave parliament because her hair was done in braids, because I could have gone with my hair as I had worn it for the last 40 years, which is to have it straightened and just do the speech. But I wanted that representation to really matter. And I think that conversation, I wanted to speak to Black women and young Black girls in a way that they knew specifically I was talking to them while being very inclusive. So when I say the size of your lips, the size of your hips, I don't have to say Black girl, the size of your Black lips or the size of your Black. We know that Celina is talking to us when she talks about our lips or our hips.
And we know that's Maya Angelou.
Right. Yes, like we know the reference points. She doesn't have to say it. But I didn't need to be explicit in order to be really, really inclusive of a body shaming conversation. I just wanted to elevate or change the way we think about body shaming. Body shaming just isn't about the baby bump or about, you know, the clothes we wear. It's our features that are being discriminated against. It's our hair that's being discriminated against. It's our hair that is being a barrier, or our clothing that is a barrier to our ability to get ahead in the workplace. And that's not right. And that needs to stop.
Yeah, and I think when we think about inclusivity and authenticity, that's a challenge for, I think, all minority groups. And this piece with hair for Black women becomes like a case example of that. But I think a major issue is people are saying it's so important to be authentic and to be an authentic leader, but they don't realize that there's a phenomenon called minority stress, which is where if you're part of any minority group, whether it's a sexual minority, or you're Indigenous or Black or other people of color or religious minority, you sometimes have to change yourself in ways to fit into dominant culture so that you're not discriminated against. And that causes extra stress. And there's a release that comes with, you know, being authentic. And so that's really why I love that, that clip, because you're just kind of fearless there and intentional about like the way you're dressed, but also the wording, like you say, my hair is dope, right?
Yes.
So,
yeah.
And I imagine that was intentional.
The entire thing was very, I mean, I think I could analyze that, and I don't like watching it, but I could analyze every single word and why I intentionally used every word, why I wore what I wore, why I braided my hair. And I had flown in from England. We had dropped off our daughter first year university. We'd flown in and out on that Sunday at 6 p.m. and I had to be in Ottawa Monday morning. And I just thought, there's no way I'm getting my hair braided right now. And some miracle made it happen. But if I can for a second, just go back to the point that you were talking about fitting in spaces. And again, this notion of it being some kind of competition, because you'll realize that that video was in September of 2016. I was elected in October of 2015. Where was Celina in those 2 years before, right? So, and you say fearless, and while I appreciate that, there was a lot of fear that went into making that speech. Because for those 2 years before, even as much as we're talking about changing spaces and changing policy to help people who equity-seeking groups, people who need it the most, you get resistance. And then I think in addition to some of the conversations that were happening that made that video come to fruition, I realized it was like a click went off, that space, Parliament, and I want people to not think about this as an indictment on the institution, but to think reality of that space. That space was never designed intentionally for me to be there. It was never designed for women to show up. There's no rules for women for their dress code in Parliament, because there was never a thought that a woman would show up and be a member of Parliament. So the space was not designed for us to be there. However, for those first 2 years, I kept trying to fit into that space. So you change yourself, you're soft-spoken, you put on the right clothes and you put on the right lipstick and you smile, right? Because you can't have resting whatever face you can't be like this all day, and you can't sit like this all day, and you have to do this, and you have to be really nice and cordial and make sure, oh my God, and do this entertaining. And then I realized, you know what, Celina, this is going to kill you. Continuing to be this inauthentic version of yourself to fit into this space that was never designed for you to fit anyways. You're trying to put a puzzle piece into something that it doesn't fit into. So you need to bring your authentic self. You need to show up at some point. You need to show up and do what you're supposed to do here. And in order for me to do what I needed to do there, I had to bring my authentic self. I had to bring the loud, oh my gosh, why is she so obnoxious? Does she think she's so good, Celina? Like, that's the Celina that had to show up, right? The high school version of me. Because
Yes.
otherwise you just become, I felt that I would just become another MP who got elected, did her job, got reelected, did her job, and didn't make an impact.
No, what you're saying resonates so much. So there's a few things there that I'd like to highlight, and please forgive, I think there still is a lag that happens every now and then with my Zoom today, but that's what I have at home. But nonetheless, I want to say like a few things. So one, talking about having to smile all the time and engage in a false version of yourself. So that is really common. And I think to survive, some of us do that. Like, no judgment on those who do it, because sometimes we do it until we get to a certain level and then we take that performance off. But we covered that actually in our first podcast episode when we interviewed Ritu Basin. She's an inclusivity expert, but she has this book called The Authenticity Principle, and she talks about the performative self. And so that reminds me of that. And then there's the authentic self. And in the middle is the adaptive self. And it's the person you kind of figure out over time. You dance this way and dance that way to figure out what's a good fit for you as you move towards authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What you just described really reminded me of that. But finding your authentic self is a journey, because particularly when you're younger, you don't know who your authentic self necessarily is. And so you have to figure that out, and then figure out how the space works and how to succeed in the space, which might be some performing. But at some point, it is important to be your own true self. And that can be, it can be stressful, but I like the way that Ritu described it as playful, right? Because it is back and forth. So actually, the other thing that you said was showing up. And so you also discussed that in the podcast. So we have a clip about what you talked about. I think you were talking, I'll kind of link it up. You were speaking specifically about the classroom context or in the workplace about showing up. But we've got a small clip from the podcast that's coming up today.
You got to be able to show up authentically in spaces and put your hand up and not be afraid to put your hand up. And then show up together. We got to decide what we want to do. And the first thing is to show up as authentically who we are. And the second thing is to show up as the village, all of us.
So that was just a snippet from the podcast, but I really want us to delve into this concept of showing up. I was actually going to remove this clip from this session because I was like, I want a clip that's like really uplifting and applies to racism, but also applies to when we think about coronavirus and other things. And when I listened to this clip again, I realized this concept of showing up is such a major theme. There's different ways and aspects to look at it. Now, because it doesn't necessarily always mean speaking up. So I'm going to start with the racism context, and then we're going to move into like coronavirus and just dealing with challenges in general. But I think part of this issue of showing up is being true to who you are. And sometimes that's leaving spaces and that's being in spaces. But it's, you see your North Star and where you're headed, and you are committed to that. That kind of showing up. And that there's an academic term for it called self-determination. And it happens at the individual level, and Indigenous communities have been so great at highlighting how that works at the community level, because it is really where you are setting that path and walking your true path, and being true to yourself. Again, which sometimes means speaking up, sometimes means being quiet, being in a space, or leaving a space. But what are your thoughts about that? Because it's been shown to help with health, actually. It's a determinant of health. It's a factor that influences health. But I was curious about your perspective on that.
So it actually is quite interesting that you say that. So for those first 2 years, and it really is like you could see my political evolution in those 4 years take place. Those first 2 years, so from 2015 to 2017, October to October, thereabouts, I was very quiet. I kept coming home and saying to my husband, this job is killing me. And he'd say, okay, babe, yeah, it's tough. It's a tough job. I said, no, it's not that it's a tough job. I do tough jobs. I know tough jobs. I've been an entrepreneur. I've been successful. I know tough. It's not that. There's something that's eating inside. It's hurting me. And I just felt like, I don't know what it is. I couldn't figure it out. And it took, so that adaptive self was really, really struggling. And then somebody in Parliament passed away. And I thought, oh my God, this job is actually not going to kill me. That is not happening on my watch. So I told my staff, like, we stopped everything. I came into the office. I said, you know what? We're going to have fun. We're going to get what we need to get done. You are going to work from 9 to 5. If you work after 5, it is not going to make it, you're not going to reflect better on me like you're a superstar staffer. It's actually going to hinder you. I do not need you working here until 11 o'clock at night just for the sake of, if you can't get your work done between 9 and 5, what you doing all day, right? So go home on the weekends and enjoy your family and do all that other stuff. So I made like real changes in the space that I was in. And then I decided to make a change for myself and start really speaking up and being my authentic self. Did I know that was happening during 4 years? Absolutely not. When I reflect back on it, and I'm writing my book now, and as I'm reflecting, I'm going, oh my God, this was a very, very specific, intentional decision. And like you said, sometimes you have to leave. And I knew in order to maintain my authentic self, to be true to myself, that I couldn't stay in an environment where, as Nina Simone says, love was no longer being served. I couldn't do it. And so I made the choice to leave, knowing that there was a community of people who needed my voice there, and understanding that I could go back, but also understanding that, this whole notion of, oh, you left the table and, you're no longer a voice at the table. I've seen the table. I know how it's made. I know how it functions. I know how to disrupt even from away from the table. So that's the beauty of being at the table, but that doesn't mean you have to stay there forever for it to work to your advantage.
I like that. I haven't heard that, but it's true. So it's important to be at the table, but it doesn't mean you have to stay there, particularly obviously if it's toxic to your own health, right? I think, I've seen a lot of tweets in particular, but I know books have been written, although I didn't read all those books, but on, the cost of success as a minority, particularly coming from the States as an African American, when you are the first or you're one of the few at the table, right? There's feminism work done around the term critical mass, right? So critical mass is where you have enough people that you're not the token representative, and it changes the dynamic of the way the whole team works or the whole organization works. But that's very different than when you are the only or one of the only. And so showing up might mean different things for different people, but I think you're clear in that commitment to disrupt that table, but you don't always have to be there. And I think it's that balance that you, like, it's important to understand these systems and structures that cause oppressions and to try to address them, but also to engage in self-care. And then I think some people also resort to being in denial. And so there's this motivational speaker in the United States, his name is Les Brown. And when he was talking about stereotypes, he's like, don't deny it, defy it, right? So it's really not about being in denial, but finding ways to defy it and change those systems, and for you in your own life to overcome those labels and not internalize them, but at the same time, still be okay and engage in your self-care, still find gratitude, still see that sunlight, even though there are challenges. Now, so I'm going to transition to my final part of the question. I'm minding the time. I know that there are questions. Carl has already told me there are questions coming in for you.
Oh, okay.
So I don't want to take up too much space, but I just wanted to speak also and ask you about like showing up, which is where we kind of started off, right? In showing up or in this context around coronavirus, but also using that as an example for any challenge that we're facing. This issue of showing up for yourself and showing up as the village, I think applies. We are in a time where it is challenging every day. And so we have to be committed to ourselves to show up emotionally, physically, spiritually for ourselves and try to take care of ourselves. And then if we have bandwidth, then it is really important for us to take care of those around us. And I don't just mean living with us, I mean our neighbors, our communities. All of the communities that face inequities are facing even greater inequities,
right,
in the context of coronavirus 19. So I think this message around showing up applies to so many things. So that's how I interpreted it. But how do you feel around, showing up for yourself, showing up for community, aside from kind of the thinking about politics and that kind of thing?
Mm-hmm. So I'd give the flip side to that. Because I want to be thinking about Celina in my different forms. So I could show up for myself and I could show up for my community. And then there are days where I cannot show up for myself. And that's where I need the village to support, right? To be and be cognizant enough to say, I need help. And I think that's why I've been so vocal about talking about my mental health issues or mental illnesses, is that I want people to know that it's okay to just talk, just say, I'm not feeling well. Because when you're able to say that, and then to say it's okay to not be okay. So number one, I'm not feeling well, and that's okay. Then I think you give yourself permission, because you're not self-stigmatizing in that like ongoing pace, to get help, for like your partner to help you, or for that village that shows up when they do show up, that you're not going, oh, no, hon, I'm good. No, I don't need your help today. No, you're going to say, okay, yes, I do need your help today. So when the village shows up, the village could show up all the time. It's whether or not we're willing, either in our fully authentic self or in our self that's unwell, to accept it. And I'll give one quick example before we go to questions. Even when I was at, after I'd done the video, so I was Politics Celina version 2. So that was post 2017, where, things were happening. I was being gaslit for talking about racism. And I was like, all this stuff was happening. And I had a lot of support. So the village showed up for me. And one would look at Twitter, look at social media and say, oh yeah, the village showed up for Celina. The one mistake, I think, when I look back, I don't like saying the word regret, because I don't like living with regrets, but the one thing I wish I did differently was actually receive the village. It makes me emotional because I didn't. They showed up for me, but I didn't. So I kept thinking, you know, I'm the only Black woman here. I'm the only. And you get into this pattern of, I'm the only one here. So, you know, and I'm self-pity almost. But am I the only one? Am I the only one in every industry? Am I the only Black female doctor? I'm the only Black lawyer. I'm the only Black that I may have been the only one in federal Canadian politics at the time, but I'm not the only one ever. So I didn't actually reach out to that village that was trying to connect with me and form those bonds that would have saved my life in there at some points, right? Giving me real oxygen. I didn't do that. So there's both sides to it, where if the village shows up and you're not ready to reach out and you're not ready to put down your own ego and tap into that village, then what's the point of them showing up? And I feel like I didn't put down my own, I don't know if it was ego or pity enough to really tap into the village and let them help me through a very, very difficult time. And they all showed up. I just didn't, I wasn't there. And I probably wasn't ready to be there.
Well, you know what? I think that is really, that's beautiful, because that is, number one, showing gratitude to the village, but also what we need to do, which is engage in that self-reflection, right?
Yes.
And that reflexivity. And so I know Oprah always said, Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better, right? And so that's that self-compassion, because we're all in our journeys. You can't know everything. And there actually is literature to show that for those of us who come from minority backgrounds, we're so used to like fighting and doing it ourselves that we don't reach out for the mentorship and supports, or go get therapy or whatever we need to do. We don't always reach out and accept help because we're so used to just struggling through. But after a while, it takes a toll. So you're not alone. That is actually shown in the literature to happen to racialized people or other minority people, because that's it's to say that that's a double-edged sword, because that's the strength that got you to where you are. So for a lot of people, it's what got them into medicine. It's what got them into law. It's what got them through. It's to push through and not listen to everybody saying, well, are you sure? And you probably can't do it. Why don't you come to the party? You're like, no, I'm going to do this. But then there reaches a point where, you know, if it's not working for you anymore, you have to take a step back. And it sounds like that's what you have done in your reflections. And I mean, you did say the magic words of writing a book, but I'm not going to take up too much space, but I'm kind of maybe prompting those who are already putting in comments if you want to ask about the book, because I'm curious. But I recognize that now it's time to turn over to Carl, Dr. Carl, to hear from the audience.
Yes, and the chat room, the comments are very lively. People are really engaging and liking what they're hearing from you, Celina and Dr. O. For example, Tracy writes in that your message is really resonating with me, and she wanted to share that she likes to get outside and, as you were saying, get some sun on her face, really take care of herself and do some self-care and wellness. We've got comments from Michelle. She says, this is so helpful. This discussion is so helpful. And thank you. It mirrors my experiences, she says. Beatrice says, so much truth in this. I feel like a lot of us feel the weight of this in our regular jobs. And that was with reference to what you were saying about your experiences in the workplace. We had a question, an interesting question. How do you manage to balance authenticity and career? Sometimes being authentic can jeopardize your career. What would you say to that, Celina?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And this is why I keep saying this is not a competition, right? Because some of us are able to do things. I remember when I came out and talked about my mental health, a woman, which I'll never forget, said to me, Celina, it's great that you could talk about this, but if I did, I fear I could lose my job or my kids. And so those of us who can be authentic and show up in our braids and show up in our natural hair and do things in our clothing and not wear a suit, but wear like our traditional African, wear, and do those things because that then starts to shift what North America considers popular or beautiful or normal or whatever term you want to call it. I don't know. It's usually when we show up and do something, then all of a sudden somebody else takes it and it becomes avant-garde, right? But we have to keep showing up. And I think that there is a cost when you are your 100% authentic self to your career. So you need to determine how much of it you're willing to risk and whether or not you could use the village to help you get what you need. So you might not need to speak up at work about something, but somebody else may hear something about it and be able to speak about it vocally in a different way.
Okay. Now let me move on to G. G says, it's very important not to suppress your feelings. The notion of a strong Black woman is sometimes maybe misinterpreted or thought of as a bad thing. When you hear the term strong Black woman, what does that bring to mind for you, Celina?
Well, I think there's two sides to that. I consider myself a strong Black woman, but I think that when it becomes detrimental to our access to healthcare, for example, or our access to services that we need for ourselves, because people view us as these ultra strong, willing to take all kinds of pain people, that's where it becomes detrimental. I also think that, especially when I start speaking about my depression, that the model of being twice as good, twice as fast, twice as everything is not a sustainable model. We could be strong Black women and that's fine. But if we're not able to then reach out for help when we need to, or like I said, connect to the village when I needed to, then I don't think that strength is going to last us. And like Dr. O said, we need that strength. I needed that strength to decide I was going to run in a federal election with no political background. You need that strength to decide that you're going to push through barriers, break status quo, smash glass ceilings. We need that strength. But we also need to know that strength needs, like a plug-in, like you need to plug yourself into something at some point to recharge. I don't think it's a bad thing, but I think if we only exist in that paradigm of strength being something that we need to do in order to accomplish, and it becomes the only form of resilience without plugging in and getting the help that we need, I just don't think it's a sustainable model. And that's my opinion.
Okay, fair enough. There was a lot of positive reaction to the clip of you, Celina, when you were in Parliament and you stood up and talked about women of color, their hair, and so on. One comment that I really liked was from Charmaine. She said, unfortunately, there is no drop the mic emoji that's available, but I would insert one after just hearing Celina speak on Black women and our hair in 2017. You've already sort of talked about the the process of getting to the point where you made that declaration in our House of Parliament. But I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the reaction you got from your colleagues and maybe from other people that were in your environment at that time.
So yeah, I think the biggest validation that I got, well, I was featured in Oprah Winfrey's magazine in March 2018. What are you willing to stand up for? And she interviewed after I did that clip. But I got a lot of very positive response. And I think from a lot of Black women, a lot of younger Black children, just saying thank you for this. But I think what I think was the most salient was that I got this response from, this is how he identified himself, an 81-year-old balding white male who said that he was going to show this video to his grandkids because it is about someone just speaking up about an issue I had no idea about. And it goes back to the question before about your authenticity and where it impacts your career. If you have an opportunity as a federal, like I had as a federal politician, they've given me the biggest microphone in the country. If I'm not going to use it to amplify the voices of those who are whispering at water coolers, talking about discrimination, talking about misogyny, talking about things that racism, talking about these things in a way that's powerful and memorable, then what am I doing? And not everybody has the capacity to do that. But when you do have the capacity, it becomes your responsibility, in my opinion, to do that and do it very well.
Okay, excellent. Let me just take a break here to reset and to remind everybody of the ways that we can interact. So you're watching this stream on YouTube Live. If you look to the right side of your screen, you'll see the chat or the comment section. We would really love to hear more of your comments. People are really engaging and having some interesting comments and questions. I'll ask Control Room to bring us back to the next poll, because we really do want to collect some information about what people are thinking. It's anonymous. We're not going to print your name anywhere or anything like that, but we do want to know what our listeners and viewers are thinking. So the next question is coming up on the screen here. Just to give you a little bit background about how it works, you can respond at, we're using a platform called Poll Everywhere. That's POLLEV.com/RaceHealth&Happy. So you can just go to the website and engage with the poll. You can also, if you're using a mobile device, text RaceHealth&Happy to 37607. And you only have to do that one time. So if you've already done it, don't worry. But do that to connect to the poll. And then for this poll, we have 6 choices. So you get to text the letter of the choice that corresponds. So the question is, who would you, the audience, like us to interview on the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast? The choices include A, for author, B, celebrities, C, doctors, D, elders, E is political leaders, like Celina used to be, and she's still a leader in the community. And then F is professors. Now, if none of those choices sort of meet what you were thinking, you can always go to the comments section and type in what you think. What do you want? Who do you want to hear from on the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast? And we're seeing here that people are engaging with the poll. This is good. 25. So you can see the numbers moving as we speak here. Looks like authors. Authors is the popular choice. We have a very literate population here engaging with our poll. This is fantastic. All right, we'll give it a couple more seconds. Just a reminder, everybody's already doing a wonderful job sort of governing the chat space, being respectful, and we just remind people that to be respectful to each other, to our guests, Celina, and to all of us on the team. We're trying to create a safe and inclusive space. So again, you guys are doing a wonderful job there. One more quick reminder, as the poll, we'll wrap up the poll shortly, but one more quick reminder, even though Dr. O and myself are physicians, the intent of this discussion is not to give any medical advice around COVID. We're really just talking about how to stay healthy and positive during this challenging time. Okay, so we'll take down the poll and we'll get back to the questions that we've been getting from our audience, which have been really interesting and engaging.
Oh, so, Carl, if there's a second, if I can ask a question as well, since the poll mentioned authors and she's writing a book.
Great segue. I'll yield the floor to Dr. O.
So Celina, are you able to comment a little bit about the book, when it's coming out, or let us know how we will be able to get more of this wisdom in writing?
Yes. So thank you. The book is being published by Penguin Random House. I'm really excited that I've joined them as an author, and it's coming out in February 2021, where right now the manuscript has been submitted. We're just doing some final edits. I've been writing the book for years. The title is Can You Hear Me Now? And it really is about a journey of my life from coming to Canada from Grenada, through my childhood, adolescence, my marriage, my business, and my 4 years of politics. And really it's about finding, like we've talked about, which I wrote notes about what you said about the authenticity principle, your adaptive self, and then coming to your authentic self. And I really think that that is the journey that this book goes through in understanding how to find how did Celina in September 2017 show up and find her voice and be that person who, you know, from a Caribbean family, and we know some of the challenges that come from coming from there. But, you know, some of the challenge that you face, some of the joy, some of the pain. And I think it really is, it's what you see is what you get. It really is a raw and vulnerable. I discuss all my mistakes in there. Because sometimes you see this person, you see the end result, and Celina, oh my gosh, she's doing so well, she's so great, she's so, I know, I'm so, and you know, and you could get caught up in the bling of it all. But the blood, sweat, and tears that it took to get here is what the book actually explains, and explains how to get that resilience, how to become that leader, how many profound mistakes I made in this lifetime to get to the point where Celina is speaking up and saying, you know, like, can you hear me now? Like this is time, this is it. So I'm looking forward to it coming out. I'm looking forward to people reading it. I'm nervous about it. I'm really scared to publish it, but I'm excited.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you. I couldn't resist, Carl. I know that I'm not supposed to be talking now. Sorry.
No, absolutely. This is a roundtable discussion, and I welcome everyone's feedback, especially the audience. We can't stop the audience. They have so much to say. Celina, you'll be pleased to see that a lot of people are very excited about your book.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, let's see. PHPM Toronto says, amazing book title. Which is fantastic. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are looking forward to it. Michelle says she's so excited. Can't wait to read your book. Beatrice says, can't wait to read it regarding your book. All right. Interesting question from Nene. She says, Black women are the foundation of our families. What should the government do to help Black women fulfill their potential?
That's an interesting question. So let me start off with the first answer that pops in my head, and then I will change that as I'll provide different perspectives. First of all, I don't think everything can be governed. We can't policy everything. So I think that while there is a role for government in terms of Black women realizing their full potential, realizing what they're able to accomplish, I don't think everything needs to be policy. I think that there is enough of us within our village with enough resources, capital, knowledge, and otherwise to see ourselves do well. We have to really create that critical mass that Dr. O was talking about earlier. That being said, I'm not going to let the government off the hook. I think when we're talking about creating equitable spaces and understanding equity, not equality, but equity, when it comes to the fact that it will take until 2111 for Black women to receive pay equity. Nobody got time for that. That's a good 100 years from now. I'm gonna be dead. So there are policy perspectives that I think the government really needs to pay attention to. The problem is right now, and this is again, not an indictment of the government, which people seem to think I do all the time, but it is an opportunity for the government to do something better when it comes to equity, and not diversity, but equity, is to actually look at the limited resources that they have, ensure that they have the disaggregated data that proves to using those limited resources in very specific ways. So when we're talking about pay equity, how can you ensure that Black women who are going to take the longest to get pay equity, it'll take till 2055 for white women to receive that same equity, how do you change that policy? And if you're able to change policy for those who need it the most, the tide will rise for everybody. When we're talking about health outcomes, again, how do you use very limited resources to ensure that women, Black women who have poor health outcomes in terms of maternal health, how do they get better service? How do they get better access? And again, that makes the system as a whole better. So whereas we might be thinking, oh, we can't look at things through a racialized lens, we know diversity is for all, we need to be equal for all. That doesn't work for equity seeking groups, and that doesn't work when you have limited resources and you can use them in a very strategic way.
Okay, now the policy questions are coming, so get ready for this one. Fatima asks, how can workplaces strive towards a critical mass of diverse employees? So she says she's noticed in many workplaces there are a few diverse individuals, but only in casual or temporary positions. So again, I'm curious to know what you're going to say, whether government has a role or how does society deal with that?
So, I mean, in the 42nd Parliament, which I was a part of, we had name blinding rules. We had, rules that for looking for more diverse hires. They only occur within the federal jurisdiction. So unless you're a federal employee, it doesn't really apply to you. Okay. So we need to think about that when we're thinking about policy and how policy is going to change what happens with 37 million people who live in this country. What I think needs to happen is we need to have businesses as leaders who decide that they are no longer going to use diversity and inclusion as if it's one big long word. Diversity and inclusion. And in order for us to have diversity and inclusion, we need to have some Black people, some people of different sexual orientation, somebody in a wheelchair, and oh my God, we hired Celina. That's a 2-for-1. We got a Black and a female. That's not how it works. And until organizations decide that they're going to be active about inclusion, active about it, not something that you just check a box and then you say we've met our quota and we put it on a shelf, but actively saying that we are going to be an inclusive space and have accountability. What happens when your space is not inclusive? What happens when you have employees who are not inclusive? What happens when you have employees wanting to come around and touch my hair? Oh my God, did it grow? And wanting to do that kind of stuff. What happens when you have these microaggressions happen? Are you able to report it? Is there a structure for accountability? What happens? Why do we need to choose gendered washrooms in 2020? Why do all of these things still have? Those are not inclusive spaces. And until we decide that we want to have inclusive spaces, until we decide that corporations are going to say, we are going to not hold any of our meetings unless the space is accessible to everybody in our workspace, until they make these decisions that hurt the pocketbooks of other organizations or helps to increase theirs, we're not going to get to a point where we have true equity anywhere. That it could be policy to a point within federal jurisdiction or otherwise, but we need people to start really shaking the frameworks around what is now a multi-billion-dollar industry of diversity, equity, and inclusion with zero results for us.
Really? Multi-billion-dollar industry, you say?
The DEI industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And where do you see Black women? Everybody wants to say, oh, women need to be CEOs, women need to be the. Look at the December issue of the Harvard Business Review, top 25 CEOs. See where you see somebody who look like me. Multi-billion-dollar industry trying to get diversity. Well, as long as you're hitting diversity as your target, as your benchmark is too low. Start looking at equity, start looking at inclusion, and start acting on those and being accountable to those, having repercussions for not achieving those. And then you'll see results. Otherwise, we're just playing a big billion-dollar game.
Wow. I want to bring Dr. O into that, into this part of the conversation. So a couple of things you brought up. Number one, the idea of microaggressions. And I think this would be a good time to just quickly review some of the actual health impacts. We know that there's good evidence to suggest that, being an other in a diverse space or otherwise comes with it these microaggressions that Celina described so well. But Dr. O, how would you address that idea of the actual health impacts, the physical impacts, the psychological impacts on people when they experience those things?
Yes, happy to. So that is part of the work that I do as a public health and preventive medicine specialist. I really focus on racism as a driver of health inequities and how it harms health. And so whether it's microaggressions or we're talking about overt experiences of racism, those things take a toll. It's just a form of stress from the anticipation of thinking that it's going to happen when you're going to that job interview or that medical school interview or what have you, and you're thinking about coming back to the hair, how to position your hair, if you have an accent, how to position your accent or yeah, what you wear and all of that. That anticipation is a stress that white Canadians do not experience in the same way. It's not to say that people don't think, should I put a ponytail or not put a ponytail? But for us, it's much greater as far as how to conduct oneself in a way that doesn't trigger stereotypes. So whether it even happens or not, the anticipation is a form of stress. Then, of course, where it does happen, so where somebody, might ask Celina for her badge as a member of parliament before she can enter a space, but for her other white colleagues, that doesn't happen. Where for me as a Black female physician, I introduce myself as Dr. Nnorom, but the patient is still asking, where is the doctor? Or instead addressing their questions to like my white male student or resident instead of me, that person might not intend to do harm, but it is nonetheless a microaggression. And so that increases like my flight or fight response, my stress and all of that. And if I don't know how to release that or how to manage that in a healthy way, then I'm either going to overreact in that moment and get very angry, or I'm going to hold it in. And that has implications as well with regards to chronic diseases like hypertension and predisposition that you see in racialized groups. So there's a number of areas there where it impacts health. And I think to come back to Celina's point, so I'm not as well versed on the stats with regards to the how much the industry is making with regards to equity, diversity, and inclusion. But I know certainly in the States, it has become quite a growing area. Initially really focused on increasing the number of women, and where the data is pretty clear in the United States, it has been white women predominantly, so that the disparities in income in the United States between white women and racialized women, and particularly African-American women, the disparities have increased, so that where this equity, diversity, and inclusion work that was started a decade or two ago in the United States, it has left a lot of racialized or other minoritized women behind, and increase the outcomes for white women. But it has grown across North America. And I think she's quite right. We need to think about that inclusivity and that equity piece. Who's not at the table? Why haven't they been there historically? And how can we bring those voices in? Because I think we all stand to benefit. We're seeing things improve actually a little bit in medicine at the University of Toronto, more Black medical students, but also bringing their voices, right? So where you can't just have different people at the table. It's not confetti. It's really about people being able to safely bring their authentic selves. And in fact, in our podcast episode where we have Celina, we've provided some literature on that and understanding minority stress and understanding the issue of authenticity in the context of diversity, and then self-determination, how you kind of, the flip side of that, determine your own path and speak your own voice. So that's actually in the show notes for Celina's episode. That's it for me.
Fantastic. Okay. Fantastic. Now, Natasha sort of builds on that. Her questions, first of all, she says to Celina, your words are powerful. Thank you. As a professional Black woman who has been educated in white spaces, I struggle to use and find my voice. Now, as a psychotherapist, I wish to elevate Black voices by helping women and men with self-doubt from trauma and anxiety to heal and thrive. So let me put it to Celina. How did you find your voice? And I know we talked about that in the podcast, which is now available anywhere you get your favorite podcasts, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc. We just released your episode, but in a nutshell, Celina, tell us a little bit about your journey to finding your voice and having the courage to express it so eloquently and with so much courage.
So first of all, Natasha, I want to just thank you for that question. I think, let's just focus on Natasha for a moment and the work that her industry does as I'm assuming a woman of color, and I'm not sure if you said that, but I have always been very candid about using a therapist, and because you can't, there's a lot of unpacking that needs to happen where we used our voice before and we got in trouble for it, or we didn't use our voice and something bad happened or something like that. Anyhow, I think finding your voice and using it in a way that's authentic and real is a journey. Again, it's not a competition. It's not, I want to be Celina one day and be able to use my voice like that. It doesn't work like that. It needs to be something that you find some passion about. And once you're passionate about something, you tend to then sort of chip away at that self-doubt, that little voice inside your head that says you can't do this. And it took me, I'm 45, I'm going to be 46 this year. It took me 43 years to get to a point where I was able to say, I am going to stand up for this. I am not going to let this move one step further. So it's a process, but it was a process that I took getting help, getting help from people like Natasha, getting help, getting therapy, finding what was holding me back. So yes, there's a lot of systemic things that are happening in our society that prevent us from getting ahead. I'm not dismissing that, but I also needed to find out what was happening in me that was causing me to trip and fall over myself a lot of the time. And how then do I slowly unhinge this voice box and dust it off and shine it up and clean it up and then say, can you hear me now? And use it, right? And that requires more than just yourself. We didn't get here by ourselves. And the more we think that we could just continue to use our voice and find it one day by ourselves, it's a hindrance to us. So thank you very much, Natasha, for the question.
All right. Now, Celina, are we able to probe a little bit more into your book, or are you allowed to talk about it at this point?
A little.
A little bit. I know Dr. O had a few incisive questions that she might want to ask, but maybe Dr. O, did you want to ask a question about the book?
Yeah, so I wanted to know, it's tricky because I don't want to put you in a difficult position, but you have spoken a little bit about your reasons to leave politics, and so I'm wondering to what extent in your book you'll be able to talk about really the details of what went on and your decision to leave, like that chapter of your life. I guess how thick were you able to make, or do you plan to make that particular chapter, or is it a chapter in the book?
I think that's half the book, to be honest. It's like 40 years here and then 4 years. It's like, but that's going to be pared down. What I don't want this to be is like a political tell-all. I don't think that that's useful for people. I don't think that's useful for people like us, women of color, marginalized groups, to be able to get change, to see change happen. And just a political tell-all, as he said, she said, I said, oh my God, nonsense. I just don't think that is useful to help people. And I think at the end of the day, that is what I want the book to do. I want people to look at this book and say, okay, so first of all, I just need my history recorded, because I believe that the medium is the message, and I don't want someone else to record my history from their perspective of what they think happened. So number one, you're going to get enough historical context that Celina's voice is able to record her own history, because we tend to be disappearing from history. Number two, I wrote the book to show people that they're not alone in mistakes that they make and choices that they make and being undecided and that sort of thing. And number three, I really just wanted people to connect, to say, not only are you not alone, but I think when we tell our stories are sticky. Stories allow us to express the humanity that I think is lost. And I think we could gain only through authentic storytelling. So it's one thing to have Celina be authentic here, but in the pages of a book that are in black and white, to put your vulnerability into those pages, to say, yes, I am flawed. I'm beautiful, but I'm flawed, is okay to do, because it allows us to reconnect as human beings.
And so I have one more question. I'm sure, again, I don't want to take up too much space from the line, but first of all, I think that's beautiful and I can't wait to read this book. And then, so are there, like right now, like since you have taken that time, what has been, have you been, I know writing a book is very difficult. I've never written one, but I know it's just extremely stressful. So has, prior to the coronavirus pandemic, has most of your time been the book, or have you been engaging in like other activities, or do you have other projects, or you kind of made a joke about people, I don't know, taking a French class or something like that. Are there other projects that you have in mind, or has the book really occupied all of your time? Because my understanding is that it can be quite intense to do it.
So people think that, so I've been signed, I got signed with Penguin a long time ago. This is not new. I've been writing my book for years. I would say way before politics started. So I think I've written this version, or a version of this book that is going to eventually come out, at least 4 or 5 times, 100,000 words, at least 4 or 5 times to get to the version that we have right now. Yeah, so it's a process. And some of it, like the last couple of years of politics, I wrote like I was so mad and I wrote it, and you can't publish mad, right? I mean, that's nonsense. So you have to like pare that down and do other things. And then there was other parts of it, like my youth and my childhood, where I was like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. And then it's like, well, then what is the purpose? So you have to pull from the parts of yourself that you thought you put away forever and put them on a page. And I think that's equally as frightening as writing, what happened in the last 4 years while being very mad, and writing what happened 40 years ago and being petrified. Yeah. So, but I just want it to be as authentic as possible.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. Thank you.
So you're both on mute. Okay.
There we go.
Carl's on mute. Okay.
There's a lot of us waiting for that book for sure. We're almost running out of time, so maybe I'll ask Control to put up the last poll. And this is just to get a little bit of feedback from all of you who have been with us here for the last roughly hour and a half. The question is, I am likely to attend another event like this. So just to reset again, if you're on the website, it's pollev.com/RaceHealth&Happy. You can fill out the poll there. If you're using your mobile device, text RaceHealth&Happy to 37607. But again, if you've done it before, you don't have to keep doing it each time. I am likely to attend another event like this. A, strongly agree. B, agree. C, neutral. D, disagree. E, disagree. All right, and it seems as though our audience has enjoyed it. Let's see, as the numbers come in, most people strongly agree. They'd like to attend another event like this. And I guess while we're all sort of social distancing and self-isolating, events like this are a great opportunity for us to get together and talk and keep each other healthy and happy, as we like to say at the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast. Fantastic. Actually, Celina, while the numbers just finished coming in, one last comment or question from Namdi. She says, I enjoyed your discussion on community and how at a time you weren't receiving of the community support, how did you navigate finding community in spaces where you did not see yourself represented?
So I just want to correct that. I did know that the community was supporting me. I just didn't proactively reach out and try to make some of the connections. So it was like you had a bounty in front of you and you're hungry, but you're not eating anything, right? Like it's all there. So I think one of the things that I really tried to do was really understand myself as a Black woman. And of course identify as a Black woman, but understand that there were a lot of other groups that were feeling just as marginalized, just as neglected as we are. And so as a federal politician, I needed to think about that in a broad sense and to create those relationships, authentic relationships in those ways. So you'll notice that on my bio or when people talk about me, they don't say Celina, the first Black woman who was a member of parliament, and Whitby, the first Black woman who was Toronto Board of Trade Entrepreneur of the Year. I purposely do not use those titles, and they won't show up anywhere because I don't like them. I think what I want to be remembered as, or I want to do, is create a space where people see what I am doing, not the title that I have. And by what I'm doing, if in an authentic way, they feel comfortable, they want to engage, they want to come around. She's not just the first Black woman to do X. She's a woman who happens to be Black, who's talking about equity, who's talking about mental health, who's talking about things that are shifting the status quo. And that's really, really important. So there's a lot of decisions that I made very early on about how I was going to present myself to ensure that those communities' access points were not blocked by a representation of what people thought I was based on a title that I'd given myself.
Okay, fantastic. Well, amazingly, we've come to the end of our time. So I'm going to pass it back to Onye for some final thoughts. And Onye, if you want to invite other final thoughts from Celina, and then we can wrap this up.
Okay. Well, we started off with gratitude, and so I'm going to end with gratitude. So thank you, Celina. I want to thank our audience for tuning in. I want to thank the RHH, so the Race, Health, and Happiness podcast team, Dr. Carl, Obadiah, Shimipe, for your hard work in putting this together. This was the first time, and we said, coronavirus, people need inspiration. This was not, a long-term plan, but we put it together. Shout out to all the students, and you talked about community, Celina, so community members who helped to spread the word, and to all of you for tuning in. I wish you health and happiness on your journeys. And, I hope to hear from you again. Celina, we definitely need to go for coffee and maybe even go to a soca jam when there's carnival again. But I pass it over to you to have the last word.
So no, I just really want to thank you, Dr. Carl, for everyone in the control room. I came on and I wasn't feeling so great. And at the end, these conversations really helped to re-energize me and ground me and figure out what my passions are. And I think we talked exclusively about my passions today. I want to thank the audience for being really engaging and for being really supportive. I think that in order for any of us to do what we love to do and what we want to do, it requires that village. And our village is so strong, so deep, and so dope. So thank you very much, all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Celina. Thank you to everybody who engaged, shared thoughts, questions, etc. I'm going to ask Control to just put up on the screen our the ways that you can contact us. So the conversation doesn't end here. We're going to keep this going through social media. We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. You'll find us on LinkedIn. You'll find us everywhere, basically. And of course, we want you to continue to support the podcast. It's called Race, Health, and Happiness with Dr. O. You can see on your screen the link that will take you to the podcast page. But of course, you can always download the podcast from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the podcast purveyors. You can also get us on social media, Facebook, Race Health, or at Race Health Happy at both Twitter and Instagram. And by all means, if you have questions, if you have ideas for what we should be doing on the podcast, please do send them in. So on behalf of the whole team here, Dr. O and our special guest today, Celina Caesar-Chavannes, I'm Dr. Carl Cabasel saying thank you very much for engaging with us today.